frankly and
Can
without
you speak
equivocation...
further into the mic, sir? These mics don't seem to be...
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
What I want to do is start off by showing you this first brief footage here. This was done by an NBC television network station affiliate. This was done in Orlando, Florida. This part was done in 1988, if I recall right. That's when it would have been. It was right after the Contra hearings. And this will explain how I, myself, originally got involved with chasing these bad guys, these bums that are attempting and are doing very well at it in the destruction of our social structure here in the United States. On the left hand, while making billions of dollars with a B for themselves on the right hand. How long it goes back, who's who and what's what, we'll get into that in a moment. First off, I want you to watch. This is a little three-part expose will somewhat explain exactly what happened to myself in 1985 and 86 and how I got involved with this ridiculous investigations that we've been pursuing for so long.
Liftoff. Many people think of the Iran-Contra affair in terms of Nicaragua and fighting communism. To them, Oliver North is a hero. Bob Fletcher thinks differently. Until last year, Bob Fletcher ran a company that made cute, furry puppets. That was before his company was taken over by an international arms smuggling ring, a ring now linked to Oliver North. Unit 2 investigative reporter John McPherson has the story.
Oliver North, facing charges of lying to Congress, came to Central Florida to support a candidate's congressional bid. 1 year ago, North sat before a congressional committee investigating arms sales and illegal support of Nicaraguan guerrillas. His testimony made him a cult hero to some. And he's getting rich. North's endorsements cost Congressman Connie Mack, for instance, $37,000. But North and his cohorts cost Bob Fletcher a lot more.
I had my company stolen from me.
Fletcher isn't a politician. He's a small businessman who watched everything he had destroyed. With fur and spring, Bob Fletcher built a toy animal and pandered it into a growing company called The Animal Factory, located at this office park in suburban Atlanta. Bob's animals sold like hotcakes at amusement parks. An Atlanta TV show ran a feature.
We got the idea and started doing it.
And Bob thought his dreams had come true when a holding company bought the Animal Factory and kept him on to run it. But slowly, Bob realized the men who bought his company made toys in the front room and ran an international arms smuggling operation from the back.
We received coded messages on the telex from the various parts of the world that had nothing to do with places we were dealing with, such as Pakistan and foreign countries, Angola, Geneva, Switzerland, places like that.
Some telexes weren't even coded, like this one, the Animal Factory, got about the sale of Hercules military transport planes.
The next things were that we were having visitations from military generals. We're talking retired 3-4-star major generals coming in. They would come in, they would have closed-door meetings, quick scurrying trips off to foreign countries.
The whole operation was run by this man, Gary Best, and Best wasn't caring for the toy company. He was bleeding it dry.
Finally, I went in and I just confronted Gary Best, and I said, let's not pull my leg anymore. How are you making the money that apparently is taking place here? And without batting an eye, he said, we sell armament.
From that point on, Best was open in his dealings. Bob set in on phone calls and conversations.
He came by my desk, my office area, and just threw a 4-color brochure on my desk, which was similar to this one, and said that we're going to start handling these.
It was a brochure for a Hellfire missile. Hellfire is an armor-piercing anti-tank missile made here in Orlando by Martin Marietta. Hellfire is available only to the United States Army.
I was overwhelmed, I guess is probably the best word. I just couldn't, and it was so out in front.
Meanwhile, Bob's toy company was failing. The icing on the cake came when Gary Best asked Bob if he'd like to make $2,000 a trip as a courier to Angola.
I was told that if I spoke to the wrong people, that there was a good chance that I would be killed.
Right then, Bob knew he had to get out.
This had changed a local toy manufacturer in Marietta into some kind of a James Bond situation, and that was something I certainly wasn't going to get into.
Bob abandoned his now nearly bankrupt company. He fled here to Orlando. But that is hardly the end of his story. In our next report, Bob Fletcher's part in the Iran-Contra investigation. John McPherson, News Center 2.
How did an innocent toy maker wind up as a front for international arms dealers? Well, that's what the toy maker wondered. Here's Unit 2's John McPherson with part 2 of toy maker Bob Fletcher's tale of intrigue.
Basically, I just had my company stolen by somebody. I feel the same towards him as I would to a guy that pulled out of the shadows and put a gun to my head and stole all of my money on the street.
Bob Fletcher is talking about this man, Gary Best. Best's company, Vista, bought Bob's Atlanta toy business. But soon after, Bob found Vista dealt in toys of war, selling missiles and cargo planes, parading retired military officers through, taking mysterious phone calls and making panicked trips to Washington and all over the world. Vista even asked Bob to be a courier to Angola. Best said the arms dealing was all legal, and in fact, when Bob reported it to the FBI did nothing. All the while, Bob's company was being milked dry.
I'm a guy that used to entertain children with little toy puppets, and now, on the other hand, I'm being dragged into the middle of some kind of international mercenary and arms operation. It was just amazing.
When Best threatened to kill him, Bob decided to get out.
He reached into his vest pocket and said, now, if you ever talk to anyone about this, and he pulled out his hand in the shape of a gun, aimed it directly at my head, and then pulled the pretend trigger of the gun.
Bob fled to Orlando to start over. But months later, familiar names began to surface in the news, connected to something called Iran scam.
All of the same characters, or at least some of the characters that they were dealing with, were the characters that were in my company.
Once again, Bob decided to tell his story. The Iran-Contra Committee sent 2 investigators to listen, but Bob says they did nothing.
And at the finish of the interview, it's sort of like, well, thanks a lot. You did a good job. Thanks for talking to us. Now you can forget about it.
They very much wanted to have the show quickly without all the tedious work of the investigation.
One of the investigators was Tom Polgar, an ex-CIA agent who lives in Maitland. Polgar claims the investigation was rushed. Congress wanted it on TV in a hurry and limited it to only diversion of Iranian arms sale profits to Contras. Bob's story didn't deal with that.
And we didn't find that their allegations were relevant to our inquiries.
Bob calls that a whitewash and was angry when he learned Polgar was in Vietnam with many of those he was investigating.
It's like having Charles Manson investigated by one of his followers.
And as he learned more about the Iran-Contra scandal, information fell together like pieces of a puzzle. For instance, Bob realized the day Best made his panicked trip to Washington was the day mercenary Eugene Hassenfuss was shot down over Nicaragua. But the clincher was this, a page from Oliver North's notebooks showing the flow of money and weapons through front companies. One company caught Bob's attention, Toyco.
I don't know, I'm just positive that it was a spin-off, Hey Toys. That was a real joke, I think, that they were using my toy company as a front.
Tomorrow, Bob Fletcher's part in a nationwide lawsuit against those behind the Iran-Contra affair. John McPherson, News Center 2. In this small office building in suburban Atlanta, Bob Fletcher's toy company was ruined by men who bled it dry.
I just had 5 years of my life blown right down the tubes.
But Bob's is not the typical story of a small businessman gone bust. The men who ruined his company were arms smugglers, most of them former U.S. military and intelligence officers. Bob fled to his native Florida after they threatened to kill him. But when Bob watched the Iran-Contra scandal unfold on television, he watched men who'd frequented his office testify to Congress, especially this man, retired Army General John Singlaub, who admits being part of the Contra resupply effort.
Bob Fletcher just got burned.
Rick Ryan is an attorney for the Christic Institute, a national legal foundation. The Institute filed suit against those behind the Iran-Contra affair. The suit charges men like Singlaub broke the law for years, illegally funding anti-communist activities around the globe. The Christic Institute uncovered evidence of gun running, drug smuggling, embezzlement, murder, and the repeated ruination of innocent people like Bob Fletcher.
Bob Fletcher has probably the most innocuous business you can possibly imagine, a puppet company selling toys at an amusement park. And yet, if you think about it, if you're a covert operative and you want to front, can you imagine a better operation than that?
The Christic Institute suit was thrown out of court this month, though the Institute is appealing, and there is talk of throwing out criminal charges against Oliver North. Vista is closed, Bob's company is gone. And Bob wonders, maybe some can break the law and get away with it, even be called heroes. Yet he refuses to give up.
I absolutely feel it as a personal obligation. I mean, it's just, I brought my children up under the idea that if you see a crime taking place, if you see something that's wrong, report it.
I think that's very impressive. I think that requires a lot of moral fiber, and that is my definition of a hero, someone who can do that, who can stand all by himself, as Bob Fletcher did for a long time, and say, but I'm not going to stop talking about this until I see the justice has been done.
John McPherson, News Center 2.
Well, I guess that sort of speaks for itself. Dan, I have to point out that little three-part segment that you saw was done in about 1988. I have to mention a short time after that was done, and I had been a deposed witness in the Christic Institute's legal action, which is a $24 million action against these same characters that showed up in the Iran-Contra business. It named Richard Secord and et cetera, which I'll show you some of his testimony also before the Senate and the Congress, where he jokingly said, you know, of course we were making money and that was the name of the game. The interconnection between Gary Best, the fellow that you saw in my toy factory in those clips, with Richard Secord, General Heine Adderholt, General Singlaub, John Singlaub, at that time, was completely an interfaced action. As a matter of fact, the later on, now, and in recent times, in the later 1990s, and starting in 92, 94, 95, Gary Best, Richard Secord, and General Heine Adderholt have been in Azerbaijan, the Russias, putting together mercenary troops, training mercenary terrorist-type groups, and supplying military weapons in that area. Would not surprise me if the illegal weapons that surfaced briefly in Bill Clinton's administration, where they came forward and said it appeared that we had been shipping some illegal weapons, they probably absolutely were done by these same characters. So the interfacing there between these same people will show, you will see here as we move forward, it's profuse and it's continuous. Now, I was surprised at the very beginning, obviously, of my situation with the toy company to find out that, in fact, these guys were just flagrantly talking about what they were doing. And I became privy to several operations. And after I left the toy factory, I heard from a very good potential, a fellow who had been involved as an agent. He told me that some of the toys from the toy factory had been flown to down to Guatemala and then restuffed with some funny little white powder and shipped back up again. Now these toys, which when I heard the story, I was sure that he was probably accurate because the toys were only he or I would have known, or somebody, myself was the only one that would have known what the toys were like, and he described them to me and they were accurate. So I'm assuming that that story was accurate. And down in Guatemala they had set up what was called safe villages, model villages they call them. They were set up with cooperation of the Guatemalan government. The bottom line is they were in fact producing, there's two sides of it. One was mind control and the other side was drugs being processed there and then being shipped up. So that was one small part of the drug relationship to our government. Now, the Pakistan source for government with President Zia, who was later murdered with a whole handful of other people having his plane blown up, Pakistan connection was also profuse, and yet George Bush, on a continuing basis, was supplying Pakistan and those related governments with huge amounts of financial assistance on a regular basis. Never once did they ever look at the possibility of some of the drug connections there. And you will see that, as a matter of fact, during the period of time that George Bush was the drug czar, we were amazed to realize when we went back over the figures that the problem of drugs on the streets in the United States had increased 1,000%. Now, an interesting thing happens, and that is that when people come forward that have been previously agents, for example, and they, for one reason or another, decide to blow the whistle on some particular a drug operation or something that was assassin or something like that, the government, the powers to be it the CIA, National Security Agency, or whomever is involved, or the executive branch, immediately will come out and say, well, we don't even know who this guy was. This fellow worked for 6 months at the Central Intelligence Agency. Maybe he was swept floors or something like that. Okay, well, one of the agents that has come forward and has supplied an awful lot of really good information is a fellow named Robert Hunt. Now, he was, in fact, with the Office of Naval Intelligence and worked directly with Oliver North. Hunt came forward and talked about combinations of drug operations, a huge setup that was done called Operation Watchtower, where they utilized actually members of the military in several parts of the country, or excuse me, several parts of the world, to set up signal towers. These towers, for the ones that were set up in Latin America, were set up in a manner such that an aircraft flying narcotics up and coming into Panama, into Noriega's Panama, could fly in, shut off their lights, follow the beacons, fly below normal radar, follow the beacons that were set up by these towers along the way, and fly right on in and land into Noriega's Panama. At that time, he was strictly a high-ranking general. His business partners, according to agents have come forward, were George Bush and Michael Harari. Michael Harari was a Mossad assassin who, by the way, was the assassin for the Mossad that had spent some 10 years tracking down the murderers during the Olympics affair several years back, when the Israelis athletes were murdered by assassins. He slowly and progressively tracked every one of those down and saw to it that they were killed. Well, Michael Harari, interestingly enough, during the Panama invasion, had been put in jail by Noriega. So apparently they had a little bit of a row between themselves, and Noriega placed Harari in jail. George Bush saw to it that a small group of Delta Force special operations guys went in ahead of the Panama invasion and pulled Harari out of jail put him on an Israeli craft and flew him back to Israel to salvage him prior to going into Panama, where, by the way, our troops committed unbelievable atrocities under the direction of that invasion, which is on another interesting video that is available called The Panama Deception, and it completely shows where we even, our troops were even involved with mass murders and assassinations of men, women, and children, and regular civilian personnel or personalities in Panama. The Panama situation, of course, has been drug-connected for years and years and years, and it had been a stepping stone. Several of the islands have functioned as stepping stones. Now, what I want to show you first off, in terms of real physical documentation of drug connections into the highest level of our government. Several years ago, Colonel Bo Greitz, Lieutenant Colonel Bo Greitz, who was the highest decorated Green Beret in history of America, had fought in the Vietnam War, and physically was, in fact, the character on which the Rambo movies were put together, actually utilizing many of his own personal experiences to create the stories of Rambo. And Bo Greitz was very much involved with attempting to retrieve the prisoners of war and the POWs and the MIAs, tracking them down and trying to bring them out. And as a matter of fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do at this point in time. I'm going to let Bo Greitz explain to you exactly what took place as one of the most startling and graphic connections into the highest level of our government. I'm going to let this footage speak for itself.
I told Harvey, we didn't fight a war in Burma. Why should there be any prisoners of war there? But, you know, a guy like Khoon Sah has got connections all over. And I said, we'll try.
I speak Chinese. Khoon Sah speaks Chinese. He's right on the southern China border. Surrounded by communists, he is fighting the communists.
He has 40,000-man army, about 8 million Shan people that make up the minority Shan state. Burma is communist. Every one of his weapons are M16s and M60 machine guns, all the latest stuff that we have. I found out why later. To make a long story short, we got in to see Khoon Sah. He didn't have any prisoners of war. And let me caveat it by saying this. We travel 3 days going and 3 days coming by horse over mountains that were literally vertical, up and down. I made the comment at that time to Scott Weekly, who was Ollie North's classmate in Annapolis and went with me. I said, I would hate to be an engineer that had to build a highway through these mountains because they're virgin teak forests, rainforests, tremendously beautiful. 6 days coming and going. Khoon Sah didn't have any prisoners of war. We gave Khoon Sah a letter from the White House that I had. That's the only thing that let me get in there. You don't walk in because the CIA has a 7-digit figure on Khoon Sah's head, and they haven't been able to collect. You think they're going to let somebody like me in there saying, hi, I want to go visit Khoon Sah? Doesn't work. But I guess they thought this guy is crazy enough because I gave this letter. I told Harvey, I said, we've got to have a credential, guy. He said, we can't do that, Bo. You know we never do that. And I said, Harvey, has anybody ever gone in the Golden Triangle and come back alive? I need something that will convince Khoon Sah we're not there to kill him. We're there for humanitarian purposes. So Harvey said, well, this will be the language. You are operating in cooperation with the White House, et cetera, et cetera. It worked. Khoon Sah didn't have one single prisoner of war, didn't know anything about prisoners of war.
It was reported by a Mr. Arthur Suchek, an American citizen who is living in Orange County of the United States in the state of California, reported by Mr. Suchek to the U.S. government that you had one American prisoner of war under your control, and that you would make him available for return to the U.S. on or about the 26th of October, which was last month. Is this true or not?
Mr. Sugar said is it's not so true. Mr. Sugar really came here and asked me about POWs and mines. And as for that we are willing to help. But I didn't promise him that, or didn't tell him that we had one prisoner of war of the United States in our hands. In reality, I wish to help you and know that there are POWs in Laos and Vietnam, but in Cambodia and Vietnam it is very hard for us.
Do you think it's possible that you could control the movement of opium through the Golden Triangle? Everything happened that he has said. If he has support of the United States, if he could with his power, his force, with all of the other people, Soviet Union, China, the Kuomintang remnant, the Burma Communist Party, Thai, the Drug Enforcement Administration, corrupt officials, could he, within his area of control, the Golden Triangle, could he stop it if he had the honest support of the United States?
For sứ American, mắc bắn trai hệ, chơi cho mình trai cho mong sứ cao hệ, này cho mình rằng qua lại phục gia đình mà mong trai này phải mi sẽ tồn.
Done?
Yes.
Yes, sir. That's the answer.
Now, with Nancy Reagan saying no to drugs, and Judge Ginsburg, you know, not allowed to sit on the Supreme Court because he smoked marijuana, and you're an accessory to murder if you ever smoke marijuana, according to Nancy Reagan, I figured we'd get an attaboy. We didn't have prisoners, but we had 3 videotapes showing Coon Saw himself. And I thought, boy, is George Bush going to be thrilled about this. We delivered those tapes to Tom Harvey just before Christmas. You try to call Tom Harvey now, because some news people did, and he doesn't return your calls. We delivered these tapes just before Christmas. Tom Harvey called me back and said, Bo, fantastic! You guys actually got in to see Coon Saw. The CIA said he had been assassinated. Somebody needed some pocket change. And there he is talking. And I said, that's right, Tom. I said, that's not fantastic. I said, Harvey, what about the 900 tons? I figured they were just bubbling over there. They were all right. They were dripping in their knickers. But it wasn't from joy. Harvey said, Bo, these are quotes, hand of the square. Said, Bo, there's no interest here in that. You be on the other end of the phone. You've just come out of Burma. You brought what you consider to be a way to stop 900 tons of heroin, not marijuana, and get rid of the cancer that has infected the bureaucracy, and there's no interest. I challenged Harvey, because I'm pretty hard-headed, and I said, Tom, didn't President Reagan appoint George Bush the #1 cop to stop drugs before it comes in the United States? I want to remind him of these little things. And he said, quote, Bo, what can I tell you? There is no interest here in doing that. Now that is White House-ese for saying, get off this subject, leave us alone. I knew that we had trod upon some very sensitive toes. I still didn't have a clue to what was going on, but I knew that we were getting close to finding out. And I took off and went to Burma again. Now, I want to show you some things when I got back to Burma. The United States government wanted Khoon Sah killed quick. And here's how they did it. U.S. calls for no mercy in drug war. These are over their newspapers. Airstrikes against Khoon Sah's headquarters. Burmese and Thai troops move on Khoon Sah. Finally, it says, and there's a picture of some Burmese and Thai standing up on top of a high mountaintop, it said, Khoon Sah stronghold seized. Now, many of you are soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors. You know that airstrikes, troops, mean war. There's hair, eyes, and teeth everywhere. When I went back into Burma in May, I took 2 other Americans with me, and it was the most peaceful area. It was exactly like we had left it. There was one big change. Remember I told you it took us 3 days to ride by horse to get there in November and come out in December? Well, when we went there in May, we went by pickup truck, straight from the Thai border all the way to right to the general's front door. And on the other way coming back, there were Thai military 10-ton trucks covered and loaded. There's only one thing that comes out of the Golden Triangle. That's heroin.
Opening up this temple.
When we got there, General Khoon Sah said, "What took you so long?" I said, "General, I was waiting for the war to die down. I don't want to get caught in all of this 26,000 troops and airstrikes." And he just laughed. He said, "That was a newspaper war, editor." I said, "What do you mean, a newspaper war?" He says, "The Thai and the Burmese came to me and said that if they don't make it look like they're doing something, they stand to lose tens of millions of dollars this year in drug suppression funds from American taxpayers." And so Khoon Sah said, "Well, make it look like anything you want to, but I want a road built here." They used the newspapers, and I want to show you something. This one here says, I may have to read it to you, U.S. provides another $1.8 million to fight drugs. So it worked. The Thai, and this guy's really smiling. This is a Thai receiving this check from a U.S. ambassador. Khoon Sah got what he wanted. Now, he assembled his officers. Took him a week to get them all together because he brought them from all over the place. And now I understand why. I just thought I was going to talk to him. But he said no, and he put me off for a week. He assembled officers from the entire Shan territory, all around the Golden Triangle. They came in. He set everybody down. He brought his secretary out. He had his secretary read from their logs.
I cannot ask the general to cut your throat by revealing any contact that would hurt your economy at this moment.
Có bên mới liều này, chỉnh mới liều này cậu khao có tìm chẳng thám sự châu, tìm chẳng thám Khoon Sahคือตัดข้อsự châu, hay làตัดข้อsự châu làว่าอันการเฮ็ดmới liềuเผยอยู่ในนั้นcậu khao có tìm chẳng thám.
But I pray that he will reveal any of the connection from the older time, or that will not hurt you now, that we might, if they are still in power, that we might be free of them.
Cái là cậu khao khaiย้อนว่าลาดันคนนั้นมีการติดต่อเก่าๆเมืองตั้งนั้นไปว่าลัดชื่อเขาแหลมตึกคือการหาเงินของจุ้มในได้ใครหินลัดไหนก็เบิกเขาจะไหนมันมีอยู่ที่ในอสุยาเขานั่นไปว่าลัดไรไหนใครหินลัดไหนลัดไรอยู่กำพองว่ามีเมืองมากกำพองว่ามีเมืองไทยกำพองว่ามีเมืองสุเจ้าSome he said some of the people he can expose to you. Some was in Burma, some was in Thailand, and some was in America, East in America.
เวลาเขาคำโบต้องคือเขาผู้หมายลงผู้หมายไหนติดต้อง
But I don't remember all their name, and my secretary remembered them and even give the information.
All right.
เมื่อดูเสียงของเขาตัดแล้วกันตัดเลย
เมื่อกี้เห็นกับปากพวกชิพาที่ชิพาเนี่ยมีเป็นเสียงอยู่ในเมืองลาวอ่ะซึ่งมันชักลีนะชักลีป้องสิ SHECKLEY มันเลย มันเนี่ยมันอยู่ใส่สายเงินลับๆมาเนี่ยมันก่อกับก้นกายาเนี่ยเมืองเราเสียหายใช่ไหมแต่กายา In 1965 to 1975 there is one CIA agent in Laos. His name is Shackley. Yeah, he was involved in the narcotic business with Lossie Han. Lossie Han.
How would you spell his name?
L-E-O Lossie Han. Lossie Han.
ใครยกที่อาปันมันคุณคนนั้น
And this Lossie Han was captured by Thai and handed over to Burma. Burmese in
อยู่เลยแต่ B73啊73啊哪一年抓起来什么呢73
In 1973, this Lossie had been captured by the Thai border police and now he is staying in Burma. And this Shackley had doing narcotic business with this Lossie had. This Shackley was CIA agent.
From 65 to 75.
Yeah. มือพ่อน่ะในเมืองมาเนี่ยอันกล้าอยากเป็นอันจื่อใหญ่กว่าน่ะอันที่กาโกยกล้าอยากเป็นจื่อใหญ่กว่านั่นดอกเสีย At that time, Lossie Han was the famous person in Burma who traffic, who involved in narcotic trafficking. มือพ่อนั่นเขาเลยพูดว่าชักลีเนี่ยมันใส่กวนอยากก่ออันต่อมันอยากเห็นนะ And we know that Shackley used one civilian to traffic and to organize the trafficking. ซึ่งมันเขาว่า Central Traffic Entity SANTO TRAFF ICANTE TRAFFIC and this civilian name was Sando Trafficant. Yeah, this is a civilian who was the organizer of trafficking for Shackley. กวนอันยิบเงินปันชักลีนะครับเป็นซีมันเฮาว่าริชาร์ดอมทัศน์ของ ARM ITEG ที่นะครับมันอยู่ในเวียดนามเขา And this finance was been controlled. I mean, the finance support was controlled or given by Richard Armitage, who settled or who stayed in Vietnam at the time. Why should Vietnam ย่อไว้เอาไหน Richard Armitage เนี่ยเขาเลยนี่เนี่ยมันเป็นมาแข่งก้นกายาเป็นอเมริกันที่กรุงเทพ And after the Vietnam War, Richard Armitage was a prominent narcotic personnel. I mean, prominent trafficker in Bangkok.
In Bangkok.
Yeah, after Vietnam War. นั่นแหละมือเดียนเมียนท่องมือในปีเองกับว่า79นะ Yeah, and the time is in between 1975 to 1979. He was very active trafficker in Bangkok.
75 through 79 in Bangkok.
มือมันอยู่ที่กรุงเทพในเมืองพ่อนั้นมันเป็นผู้ให้การบ้าดีการโยงอเมริกัน And he was one of the consular or ambassador, what do you call it? Embassy employer.
Okay, embassy employee.
Yeah. ว่านั้นมันทำออกในการโยงอเมริกัน After that, after 1979, he quit from embassy employee. ก็มันมาตั้งกลุ่มอย่างนึงเขาเรียกว่า the Far East Trading Company and then he established a trading company named the Far East Company the Far East Trading Company เอาอันชื่ออันไหนอ่ะกายาละลับ and then he used the name of this company as an under table he involved in drug trafficking business too เดี๋ยวที่มันทำเอาเงินที่ไหนหาซื้อกล่องเนี่ยขึ้นซอยวันเจียในเมืองเล่าเนี่ยที่กลุ่มนี้ที่ไหน And then the finance that he gained from the trafficking, he buys ammunition and supports the Lao anti-communist troop. And CIA in Laos.
So he used the drugs and also in arms and munitions.
Yeah. ในต่อถึงมาเดียวไว้นั่นปะมันนั่นปะมาเร็วเริ่ม And this is the part มันนั่น 1979 อันนี้ถ้าเนี่ยเขาว่ามันคนต่อยมันหนำในเมืองลาวก็มีหนำในเมืองไทยก็มีหนำ And this Richard Armitage had a lot of friends in Laos and in Thai คนอันต่อยมันเนี่ยคนไหนน่าเจียงเอามี And there is a lot of CIA personnel who helped him. And CIA อันต่อยมันอยู่ในอันอยู่ที่กรุงเทพเนี่ย Daniel Arnold เนี่ย And one of them, the CIA that helped
these are American people.
American people. His name is Daniel Arnold. A-R-N-O-L-D. A-R-N-O-L-D. L-D. Arnold. มันเป็นคนต่อยสดมันดักหนักอันมันหมดเลย And this Arnold was the what you call ammunition trafficker for whatever Richard want. สำหรับที่นั่นคนนั้นก็วันยาผินต่อยก้าวันยาผินสำหรับ Mr. Jerry Daniel. And there is one name Mr. Jerry Daniel was the one who organizing the drug trafficking for Richard Armitage. นั่นเป็นคนอเมริกันมุ่งคนอเมริกันมุ่ง This was all American people.
Those are American.
Yeah.
One of the men named by Kunsa. This is not me naming him. This is Kunsa, the drug overlord, reading from his records, named Richard Armitage as being a chief drug trafficker from 1965 through 1979. You know where Richard Armitage went in 1979? He went to Dole's staff, then he went to Reagan's campaign staff. Now he is the Assistant Secretary of Defense, right underneath Mr. Carlucci.
Richard Armitage has been responsible for recovery of U.S. prisoners of war way back before we actually got involved with H. Ross Perot. He is still responsible for them. What I'm trying to do is find you Kunsa's letter because it'll say it best. Here it is. Letter from Kunsa written to the U.S. Justice Department dated 28 June 1987. Just want to read you a couple of sentences. During the period 1965 to 1975, CIA chief in Laos, Theodore Shackley, was in the drug business. Now, Theodore Shackley would have been director of intelligence of the CIA if George Bush had not been appointed to that post. Theodore Shackley was then posted as the deputy director for covert operations. It said Santo Trafficante acted as his buying and transporting agent, while Richard Armitage handled the financial section with banks in Australia. All of a sudden, the words from Jerry King came back. Too many bureaucrats don't want to see American prisoners returned alive. Why? Couldn't figure it out. Gunboat at midnight in the middle of the Mekong. Voice of America saying we're there to abort our attack. Walsh and the general recaptured before turnover. Why? Now I'll tell you why. If this is true, it means that Richard Armitage and a lot of other people that are named here are the least men in the world that want to see Americans come home. Because when American prisoners of war do come home, whether we bring them home or they drag themselves across that Mekong River somehow and report to the U.S. Embassy and they're not destroyed there, when they do come home, because they will, there'll be one hell of an investigation as to what took the greatest nation in the world so long to bring home heroes that have been waiting for more than 15 years. And when that investigation is conducted, it will show, as Kunsa says, that these men, these bureaucrats, appointed, not elected, appointed, have broke the faith with you and this country and its laws, have used their office as a cover to run drugs and arms, to promote covert operations that the United States Congress did not approve of.
Now, I must point out that this is very important. The Thomas Clines, Shackley, Ted Shackley, and Richard Armitage, who was named on that footage there by Khoon Sah, the biggest drug operative on earth. Khoon Sah, the last couple of years, has moved 1,500 tons, 1,500 tons of heroin from Burma. Richard Armitage, who he talks about there, being connected directly with Trafficante back in the 60s and 70s. Mr. Armitage was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for George Bush. He is a CIA operative, and of course Ted Shackley and Clines were both also CIA agents. At the highest level, these were actually station chiefs, also named as major drug smugglers by Khoon Sah, who supplies the world with the heroin. Interestingly enough, Richard Armitage was a partner in the Far East Trading Company, which you saw mentioned on that video, which was also a partner with General Heine Adderholt. He was Richard Secord's commanding officer during the Vietnam War and the problem with Air America and running the narcotics out of Vietnam and Laos at that time. Closely entwined with Vang Pao. Vang Pao, the warrior from Laos area that was constantly flying narcotics out. Vang Pao presently lives on a large ranch in Montana. Was purchased for him by the Central Intelligence Agency. He has ongoing protection by the agency, and more than likely is probably still dealing in some funny stuff rather than just soybeans as he supposedly grows on the ranch. Premier Key, formerly from Laos and Vietnam, is presently in Louisiana. He owns a shrimping operation. How come I can't relate to a premier formerly used to gold and all the fineries of life running a shrimping operation? Although he says he's doing well, I wonder if the shrimping possibly could be connected to the transportation of funny white powder, as with Oliver North's communications. I'm about to show you here. Now this is an internal memo from actually the courier, Rob Owen, and that's, I say the courier, this is a young fellow, the enthusiastic supporter of Oliver North that ran all over the country generating funds for the Contras and assisting Oliver North in communications between ranches in Costa Rica, etc., and other locations. Rob Owen, in this communication, as you can see, first I want to show you this. This is the way this page was brought before the United States Senate and the Congress. As you can see here, it's completely blacked out. This is typical things called redacting, which is done on the basis, of course, good old national security. If you're running a drug operation and maybe killing folks and murdering and doing things of that sort on the side, of course, you can always cover it up by doing it under the auspices of national security. You cannot pursue it in court, you cannot talk about it, you cannot get any information on it. And likewise, as where they classified my information out of my toy factory, which I'll show you in a moment. The point is that the paper you're looking at now is part of that communication, was retrieved as part of the investigations on the Contras. And I had been able to retrieve that same piece of paper, and by the way, it's only one page of about a 6 or 7 page letter, the one page being most interesting to myself. I had retrieved it prior to having it blacked out. Now, as you see it here, you will realize why it was blacked out. They talk about a drug operation here, folks. This is, as you will see, it's a shrimping company out of Miami. The people that were involved with that shrimping operation would have been known to certain people in the Senate and the Congress, the same as most people understand and know Pablo Escobar. that they are, in fact, a major drug operation. He was a major drug operation. These personalities here, Mr. Munoz and Cheney's, Frank Cheney's, etc., you will see that's mentioned here in the paperwork. It was a drug operation that Oliver North was totally involved with and setting up the Southern Front and using their ships, etc., cooperatively. If you also notice here, there's a reference to a DEA agent, a drug enforcement agent, that Oliver North was going to see that came along on board and assist them with dealing with the drug operators. Well, that's pretty convenient, isn't it? This paperwork has never been seen previously in public at all. No one has known about this. Now, unto itself, that's not too bad. If you knew, in fact, that it was a drug operation and that they blacked it out for their own security, national security reasons. However, if you look over here, now you're going to see that they took Treasury money, direct United States Treasury wire transfers. The total amount of these was about $300,000 and $400,000. This was under the auspices of Oliver North's humanitarian assistance program into the Nicaragua Contras. But the reality is, folks, as you will see here, now that you know who these people were, you will see that these transfers went into the narcotics front operation, the shrimp drug front operation. Here's one transfer, here's another one. Now, additionally here you will see, and there is better copies of this, but nonetheless this is sufficient for today. This is the actual account out of the bank of the drug operation that shows the receipt of all of the United States Treasury transfers of your tax dollars into the drug operation. I'm sure you don't mind trying to help these guys out a little bit. Additionally, you will see here, this is the signature card signed by the drug smugglers that owned that shrimping operation. Now I want to cut away to a fellow who was the bookkeeper for the Medellin cartel and the biggest drug operations out of Colombia, and he'll tell you a little bit about his connection with the Contras and the United States National Security Council.
Ramon Milian Rodriguez was brought to Capitol Hill. Ocean Hunter, it appears, is just the beginning. Under oath, he told senators that the drug connection is much larger, that he'd handled a direct $10 million in cash contributions from the Colombian cocaine cartel to the Contras.
Outside of the United States, drug dealers are very powerful people. They have cash. The CIA deals primarily with items outside of the U.S. If they're going to deal in foreign countries' policies and politics, they're going to run up against or run with the drug dealers. It cannot be done any other way.
Do you have any evidence, any proof, any ideas of whether the large sums of cash you had delivered to the Contras, whether it actually made it to the Contras? Whether it actually went to beans and rice or bullets or...
There's no way to trace cash.
What's your guess?
My guess is that not all of it got there. You know, but I'm a cynic.
Where would it have ended up?
I would say that you're going to find a lot of it in nest eggs, foreign accounts, waiting for the day when the Contra issue is no longer popular, when Congress votes it out of existence, and they have to do something else for a living.
Well, okay, that's nice. At least it's good to see we have ongoing cooperation between ourselves and the drug smugglers directly out of the White House. I'm sure that makes you feel comfortable. Now, when you have people like Mr. Robert Hunt that I spoke about earlier, who came forward and talked about things like the Zapata oil rigs that's owned by the George Bush family predominantly, being used as the oil rigs being used as drug drops. Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, when they come forward and they talk about these things, and they talk about the Watchtower Project, which was the little signal towers that flew the planes into the Noriega's Panama, and also talked about things like these Zapata oil rigs being as dope drops, etc. Commonly, the agencies will say they don't know these guys. Okay, you know, this guy didn't know anything at all. Well, here I'm going to show you where Robert Hunt, who did come forward and talks about these events, is totally documented. This particular letter that you're looking at right here was written from the Israeli embassy to Lieutenant Colonel Hunt. You will also see here, this is a letter from Oliver North relative to the operations and that they were carrying on. Additionally, you will see that there is even a letter here after they had decided they needed to shut Mr. Hunt up. They put him in jail, which is a regular operation on an ongoing basis. This is a letter from Bill Clinton after he became president, sort of writing to Lieutenant Colonel Hunt, who had been totally taken advantage of at this point, and kind of saying, gee, well, you know how it is in this, in the modern world here. It's kind of too bad that you're in jail, but I'll get back to you. And that was pretty much the extent of that communication. There are other documents that you will see here where Robert Hunt also is named, which will completely prove who he was for sure. There are internal memos from John Poindexter, Admiral Poindexter, of course, Oliver North himself, and George Bush, and back and forth during the Contra business, and talking about how, Robert Hunt of the Naval Intelligence was in fact who he says he is. So the information, when he comes forward, when Mr. Hunt comes forward and talks about Operation Watchtower and Operation Orwell, which was a back end of the Operation Watchtower, Watchtower being the little in actually utilizing our military forces. Again, it's your taxpayers' dollars. I'm glad you know that at least they're doing something with your money. They took taxpayers' bucks, military officers, soldiers, and equipment, and placed these towers in so that the drug planes could fly in from Colombia and land in Noriega's Panama for years by the tons, folks. We're not talking small envelopes of cocaine like Oliver North's secretary, Fawn Hall, was using. Now, Fawn Hall would use just small amounts, for not the tonnage anyhow. She admitted that she had done at least 40 times, so it's probably 3 times that, but 40 times utilized snorting cocaine while she was at the National Security Council, the highest, most secure positions in the entire world, the most sensitive positions in the world, the National Security Council and Administration for the United States of America. And Fawn Hall, the secretary of Oliver North, admitted to snorting, maybe 40 times during that period of time. And, of course, it's interesting to note that when the cocaine and crack is sent in, or the heroin is distributed into the black community or the Hispanic community, when they use these narcotics, they're referred to as just, disgusting dirtballs, or they're drug smugglers, or this or that, they're pushers, and they're a low-level, low-life people. However, when Fawn Hall and the folks out of the White House would snort some coke, it's referred to as recreational narcotics. I always thought that was a nice term. This is being politically correct. Right. Yes, well, they absolutely make me sick, and I don't know where your head is at, but people that are into that stuff and propagating and bringing in more and more to kill our children and having our babies born addicted, etc., they ought to all be taken out and hung, all right? But nonetheless, they would refer to it, of course, as recreational drugs. Now, also, for example, when we talk about agents coming forward, we had a drug agent, a DEA agent, as you can see here, came forward quite a long time ago. This was back in '94. He came forward and said, hey, Oliver North was linked to drug operations. And, of course, they typically, again, with his situation, just kind of poo-pooed it as best they could and sidetrack the possibility of any connections. Now, I want to get back to Richard Armitage. This is a very upsetting situation. Richard Armitage was directly involved, according to the Coonsaw, the fellow that grows the poppies for the heroin, for example, directly named as being a major financially involved and or money laundering personality and a purchaser of the cocaine, or excuse me, of the heroin out of Burma. He was also directly involved with Trafficante. Now, this is what's rather upsetting. A little while back, General Colin Powell came out, did a big story, and said one of his most intimate, closest friends, a godfather of his children, is Richard Armitage. Now, I certainly don't know anything negative about General Powell other than the fact that he was the general that was signing off on many of the missiles that were illegally being shipped by Oliver North and his people. Some people are not aware of that, but his friends have to be looked at if, in fact, Richard Armitage is as close to him as an advisor, an ongoing advisor, to the guy that's probably going to end up at a very high level once again in the government with Bill Clinton. Now, additionally, I'm going to show you here at this point in time, this is actual transcripts of handwritten notes of Oliver North's. These were his own little notes, personal notes in a spiral notepad that he was making during telephone conversations, and he made these as little, I'm going to call them memory joggers for himself. One is, you will see here on June the 27th of 1984, talks about a drug case and then a DEA program on controlling cocaine. And then he says either cut off Colombians readjusting and possible negotiations to move a refining effort to Nicaragua. This is Oliver North talking about assisting in the movement of a drug refinery to Nicaragua, unless they were refining something else. That's always possible. Except the very next line is Pablo Escobar, Colombian drug czar, and informant, the pilot, is an indicted criminal. Carlos Lader and Freddie Vaughn. Now, Frederick Vaughn is an ongoing drug smuggler that was involved on a regular basis with the CIA and the National Security. He comes up continually in Oliver North's paperwork. Now, here's another one here. If you look here, you'll see this. It says, call from Claridge. That was head of the CIA, a high-ranking CIA officer at that time. And then call Michael in reference to narco issue. And then he talks about the pilot went and talked to Vaughn. Again, this is the drug smuggler we were talking about. And that they wanted an aircraft to go to Bolivia to pick up paste. Now, this is not Elmer's glue, folks. This is cocaine raw paste that Oliver North is referencing. They needed an aircraft to pick up the paste. And then it says they want an aircraft to pick up 1,500 kilos. That's rather specific. I know, maybe it was just something else, right? Certainly. Then there's a reference to a leak on the drug case. All right? Now, what we're talking about there is the Barry Seal situation. Barry Seal was a major drug operator. And I'm going to let you watch this video which explains the Barry Seal situation. Barry Seal, by the way, had a hanger-on, a guy hanging around him in Arkansas all the time, kind of like like the hanger-on, that's the proper term. And his name was Roger Clinton. Well, Roger Clinton, brother, of course, of the president, is a major hanger-on with the biggest drug smuggler of cocaine in the history of America. Well, I know, that's just coincidental again. I'm going to let you watch this about the Barry Seal operation, and it also involves some of the money laundering out of Arkansas.
This is a story about Contras, drugs, guns, and the CIA, money and political connections from the Reagan administration to the governor's mansion in Arkansas during the 1980s. In the 80s, a CIA secret operation involved guns, drugs, and money in western Arkansas, and was connected to friends of Bill Clinton and a state agency in central Arkansas. Clinton, who had the power to order an investigation at federal government expense, turned his head and looked the other way.
Cover-up? Yes, no doubt in my mind. Corruption involved? No doubt in my mind. At the highest levels of our government? No doubt in my mind.
Former Internal Revenue Service investigator Bill Duncan investigated money laundering in western Arkansas in the 80s.
Well, how far will the United States government go to protect an operation?
Will they kill a case? I think history has shown that that can happen.
Did it happen?
In my opinion, yes.
Why? The evidence suggests Reagan and Bush administration officials were protecting a highly sophisticated CIA covert operation in western Arkansas. It involved Barry Seal, a CIA operative and DEA informant who was running guns out of and drugs into the Mena airport. In this 1991 deposition before the Arkansas State Attorney General and then Congressman Bill Alexander, CIA pilot Richard Brennicky detailed the cargo he transported as part of the Barry Seal operation. From Mena, I would take people who had been trained in and around Mena, generally paramilitary or military forces from Central America. They would be taken back to Panama City, where I would drop them. And in addition to that, we would carry weapons that were being shipped down there. Enter Terry Reed, former CIA operative, pilot, and author of the book, Compromised, Clinton, Bush, and the CIA. Reed says he trained about 24 Nicaraguan Contra pilots in 1984 and 85 from this landing strip near Nilla. Reed says he quit the CIA after discovering agency operatives were running drugs out of Mexico. In his 1991 deposition, CIA pilot Brennicky says he flew cocaine from Panama to Arkansas. In each load, said Brennicky, he carried 400 to 600 pounds. He said he flew it to Mena, Arkansas. Brennicky says he laundered drug money for the CIA through numerous foreign banks, including the infamous BCCI, Bank of Credit and Commerce International. Bill Clinton said he created ADFA in 1985 to expand industry in Arkansas and create jobs. Marketing director Larry Nichols says as governor of Arkansas, Bill Clinton had the power to stop the ADFA loan to his friends, the Wards and Parkometer.
And it goes all the way to the top. Bill Clinton had to personally sign off on every bond issue, on everything that was done at ADFA.
And what about the CIA covert operations money, the profits from the drug and gun sales? Some of the money was dropped from airplanes at night and onto this property near Little Rock.
Cash was being jettisoned from aircraft that were flying into the Little Rock airport. On final approach, the pilot would set up the approach so that he would fly over a predetermined drop zone and quietly jettison a duffel bag that would normally contain approximately $3 million.
Reed says at the time the property was owned by Seth Ward. Where did the CIA money go once it was dropped onto the alleged Ward property? Reed, the former senior CIA source, and Nichols allege it was laundered through the Dan Lassiter bond firm. The Lassiter firm was underwriter for some of the ADFA bond issues.
I could never find a bond issue. I could never find where one person sold a bond.
Lassiter was a close friend of then-Governor Bill Clinton. In 1986, he pleaded guilty to distributing cocaine. He served 2.5 years in prison and was then pardoned by Clinton. Lassiter, some of those profits from gun sales and other CIA operations end up back in the United States. Remember, Brennicky and other former CIA sources say some of the money was deposited into accounts with BCCI, and BCCI does have a U.S. Little Rock connection. It involves Little Rock billionaire Jackson Stevens of Stevens, Inc. Stevens helped arrange a deal in which Union Bank of Switzerland, reportedly a joint venture partner of BCCI, bought $25 million in stock interest of the Texas-based Harken Energy Corporation. The director of Harken Energy is the son of former President Bush. During the same period of time, the Lassiter Company was being sued by several savings and loans for illegal trading of Treasury bond futures. Former Rose Law Firm partners, the late Vincent Foster and Hillary Clinton, represented the federal government in the First American and Home Federal disputes, two of the savings and loans that sued Lassiter. The lawsuits were settled with Lassiter having to pay one dime for every dollar of damages requested. At the same time of the illegal trading and the S&L lawsuits, a series of assassination attempts began on Dennis Patrick's life.
I know that no one ever threatened my life that I'm aware of. No man had ever been hired to come and murder me until this situation occurred.
Illegal trading and the assassination attempts against Dennis Patrick. Lassiter has refused to talk to CBN News about alleged money laundering and unauthorized...
I have to point out that Roger Clinton, being a hanger-on of Dan Lassiter and also of Barry Seal, he eventually, of course, he was blowing cocaine on a regular basis and snorting it. I want you to watch this. This is very brief. This is genuine undercover footage of Roger Clinton. And he makes an interesting statement here relative to his brother, if you'll watch this.
Several eyewitnesses have testified that the Clinton boys have been heavy coke freaks. This film clip, taken from Jeremiah's startling undercover video, Mina, the cover-up, shows Roger Clinton in this police surveillance tape doing a line of cocaine.
I took 3/4 of an ounce.
Roger said he took 3/4 of an ounce, and it was reported. He said, I've got to get some coke from my brother. He's got a nose like a vacuum cleaner. A nose like a vacuum cleaner. Well, that's kind of a heavy statement coming from the brother of the president in reference to the president's habits. Although I had noticed that it seems the president sort of has a nasal problem or an asthmatic type problem periodically. Maybe this would help clear his head. You know, there's something everybody has to understand, though. What we're looking at here is not a partisan problem. It's not the left or the right. It's not Republicans or Democrats that are corrupted in any one given administration. It's both sides of the fence. Most of it is above the level of most of the Senate and the Congress. I'm going to say at least half of them don't know what's going on. The Central Intelligence Agency certainly have been involved with it and involved in a cover-up. The Justice Department has been involved with shutting things down, investigations. And we have to look at another agency called the ISA, which is above the CIA. And this intelligence services agency had been involved profusely with these cover-ups and interfacing and above top secret covert operations that fell also into the drug operations. You know, back in, give you a good example, 1986, November, I believe it was November 26th of 1986, at the Yuma Proving Grounds, which is a top secret military, mostly Army armament, large shells and larger armament which comes out of there and is what they use actually as a proving grounds. It's actually secret to the extent that you cannot fly over it. If an airline flies over it, they have to get special clearances, and to land there, of course, you have to have certainly a special clearance. Well, on November 26, 1986, a medium-sized craft got some types of clearances, landed, and amazingly enough, out on the outskirts of the airstrip, the pilot fell asleep in the craft, and nobody bothered him until the following day when the security guards came across him asleep. And with a little bit of conversation with the people that were running the base, they ordered up fuel. They refueled the craft, and he flew off without being interrogated or investigated at all for landing at a top security, high security base there at the Proving Grounds. Interestingly enough, the following day, and this is, by the way, a long story that I'm very much abbreviating, the following day, they discovered right at the location where the craft had landed 17 duffel bags of pure cocaine, some 1,400 pounds of cocaine. And the value of that coke, by the way, was somewhere in the neighborhood of $250 to $300 million at the street level. And it's sort of like a story that just vanished. A few people wrote about it, etc. But the big point here is that there was some kind of a clearance for him to land, and that very same day was the time when they were going into Oliver North's offices and starting to go through the paperwork. And there was a big red flag, and a big panic had gone up throughout the Oliver North Contra programs. And my feeling is that the people that were to pick up that coke were scared by the new red flag and the excitement that was going around Washington relative to the investigations of the Contras, so they never picked up the cocaine, and they just simply left it on the airbase. There were several other people that have had clearances on a regular basis flying into other military bases with dope, narcotics, marijuana, cocaine, and heroin. And as a matter of fact, here's one fellow right here, this fellow named Tolliver, who was a pilot that had, well, I'm going to let you see this. This is actual footage, an interview with one of the fellows that was flying the coke up.
The government decided to get into the drug business in order to pay for the Contras? The American government.
As incredulous as it may sound, I believe that not only decided to get into it, I think they orchestrated the whole thing.
Mike Tolliver is a pilot whose principal occupation has been smuggling drugs. He's currently serving a 3.5-year sentence in a federal prison in Miami for a conviction unrelated to the secret flights he made for the Contras. He says he was approached in 1985 by longtime CIA operatives to run what they called supplies.
We could bring back their cargo without ever having to worry about interception, arrest, anything like this, that everything was taken care of.
What kind of cargo were you talking about?
Drugs.
And same people you believe set you up with the arms.
Exactly.
Oh, of course. That also set you up with the 25.
Sure.
25,000 pounds of
And
pot?
change, yeah, that's what the piece of paper they gave me said 25, I think 360.
So what do you do with that 25,000 pounds of pot?
We take off from Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and we leave.
To?
South Florida.
Where in South Florida?
We landed at Homestead.
Homestead?
Air Force Base.
With whose clearance?
I was given a discrete transponder code to Squawk about 2 hours south of Miami. I received my instructions from the ground for traffic separation and told them what my destination was.
What did you say?
I told them that we were a non-scheduled military flight into Homestead Air Force Base.
What happened when you landed?
We landed about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, I guess. And a little blue truck came out and met us, and it had a little white sign on it that said, "Follow me."
And you did?
Two flashing lights, and we followed it, right.
To where?
Some area of the field. I have no idea. I've never been there before or since.
Were you surprised you were going to land all this pot at
Well, I was a little taken aback, to be honest with you. I was somewhat concerned about it. I figured it was a setup. They were going to, you know, or it was a DEA bust or a sting or something like that.
And instead, nothing happened to you?
No, the little guy in the truck puts us in the pickup truck and takes us out, and I get in a taxi cab.
Did you get paid for the flight?
$75,000.
Tolliver identifies this as the plane he flew. The plane traces to a company that was hired by the government to fly humanitarian supplies to the Contras.
Now, additionally, there was a world's champion speedboat racer that was drawn into this same circle of drug deliveries. His name was Jorge Morales. I want you to watch this brief interview with him also. This is relative to his ongoing cooperation with Contras, the national security operatives, and the CIA operatives, and cocaine.
Why would the CIA allow drug planes to come into the United States loaded with coke for the U.S.?
Money.
George Morales is a world champion boat racer. He is also a world-renowned cocaine trafficker whose empire extended from Colombia to Miami. Morales was indicted for running cocaine in 1984. He says the CIA used his indictment to pressure him into providing planes, pilots, and $3 million in cash to the Contras. He, too, is in federal prison awaiting sentencing on the 84 charge. So you're saying drug planes were allowed into the States as long as somebody was kicking some money into the Contra coffer?
Definitely.
Is this like just a one-time occurrence?
No.
Somebody snuck in?
No.
Frequent?
Yes.
Routine?
Yes.
Believe it or not, the entire business is compartmentalized. I'm like a teamster. You know, I'm in transportation. You got people that are in loading. You got people that are in offloading. You got people that are in distribution. People that are in sales. You know, it's like an IBM situation.
Gary Betzner was one of George Morales' top pilots. He, too, was in federal prison in Miami on an unrelated drug conviction. His sentence is 15 years. Like Morales and Tolliver, he has little to gain from talking about these drug flights.
I took 2 loads, small aircraft loads, of weapons to John Hurl's ranch in Costa Rica and returned back to Florida with approximately 1,000 kilos of cocaine.
What exactly was in the plane that you flew from Fort Lauderdale?
Well, there was some C4 explosives, M60 machine gun. It was stacked all the way to the ceiling.
How many pounds of weaponry?
I would estimate around 2,500 pounds. Well, I understood right away it wasn't the private guns that went down that were that important. It was what was coming back. They could buy much larger and better and more sophisticated weapons. And it was unaccounted for cash.
Additionally, I guess it's coincidental, but many of the larger shells and heavier ammunition that Oliver North and his people were shipping down to the Contras were in fact coming out of and being supplied through the Yuma proving grounds. I know it's just coincidental, so we'll just forget about that point. Now, When I, at an early point in time, started chasing these bad guys with my little toy factory, there was unbelievable amount of stoppage or interruption with legitimate investigation. I guess the most flagrant would be what I'm going to show you right here, which is the Justice Department writing me back and telling me that the information that I was attempting to retrieve out of my own toy factory, the information about those personalities that were involved in my toy factory, constituted information that made my toy factory a national security threat. You remember the little fuzzy puppets, the little hand puppets. So the Justice Department tells Mr. Fletcher and his lawyer that it's national security secret and that we can't get the information about the people that were involved in my little toy puppet company. That's pretty interesting. I guess that's done on the basis that if those little animals get out, the little puppets get out and across the country, that we'll have a serious problem. A little later on, I wrote to the Treasury Department because I had been interviewed by everybody you can imagine during this period of time in '87, and I contacted the Treasury Department on Freedom of Information and wanted to know what they had at the ATF offices, where I had spent 2 different trips there. And the ATF was very upset, as a matter of fact, when I originally came in and told them, for example, that they were running missiles out of my toy factory. And their means by which to interfere with legitimate investigations was to send this letter back that you see here, which says that they had no record that I was in to the Treasury ATF. Now, as a matter of fact, the agent on board at that time, Mr. Merkin, was so upset by what he saw, he had given me his personal home telephone call and had even asked about the possibility of myself getting involved with the witness program. Well, of course, that's a joke because these half of these bums that I'm talking about are at such high levels that they would be able to access the witness program stuff anyhow, so that was a joke, and I didn't bother to get involved with that any farther. But this letter came back from the Treasury Department, and they said, in fact, that nobody even could retrieve any files on me. That's baloney. That's garbage. Now let's go back once again to other people in government that were involved at this time. Bill McCullum, the Republican representative out of the state of Florida, was in fact working with Oliver North during the Contra programs with a fellow named Vaughn Forrest, his administrative assistant. Vaughn Forrest was, in fact, recruiting inside the congressional offices of Bill McCullum, recruiting mercenaries to function with Oliver North. Now, I'm not sure if there were drug connections involved there, but I do know that Vaughn Forrest had some curious friends. For example, an agent named John Hull, whose ranch was used on an ongoing basis in Costa Rica as a drug pivot point, a transshipment point, who was on the payroll of the Central Intelligence Agency. That's proven and documented. Mr. Vaughn Forrest happened to be visiting John Hull on the evening of the attempt to murder Eden Pasteur and blow him to pieces, which killed a couple of, actually at least one young reporter named Linda Fraser from Atlanta, Georgia. That bombing, the attempt to kill Eden Pasteur for the CIA, was done and at a period of time when the CIA actually was trying to replace him with someone else that would be more cooperative. That particular murder is the basis on the Christic Institute's legal action. Now later on, as I pursued more information, I did get the part of the FBI reports. There were hundreds of pages. I got a little bit out of the FBI related to my case with the toy factory. As you see some of these, this is 7 pages from the FBI report on my own situation that does absolutely name those personalities that were functioning in and out of my toy factory, the one that was classified as a national security threat. You'll see here there was a story or two done in the press also that talked about my toy factory and being used as a covert front. These stories were done back in '88 and '89 for the most part. And again, the ability of these folks to shut down inquiries is a little spooky. If they can't do it by intimidation or, for example, just doing national security stamps on whatever you're trying to do, the alternate then is to just kill people. The numbers of dead people related to these operations that were in a position to blow the whistle is mind-boggling.
The night that Vince Foster was killed, not committed suicide, Robert Getzman called me, apparently drunk, and had stated to me on the phone, we did him, and I asked, did who? And he said, Vince Foster.
There was, when they did the Operation Watchtower, which again were the little signal towers for the drug operations done by government operatives, they also decided that they needed to set up kind of a surveillance operation on many of the people that were involved with Operation Watchtower. They called that operation Operation Orwell. And this was a tapping of telephones, a video reconnaissance, an audio reconnaissance, and a huge variety of means by which to spy on people. Now, originally the concept of Operation Orwell was to just watch those people that directly knew information as to what officers and military personnel and equipment and money was used for the Watchtower operation, and any of those people that may have been compromised, like there was a governor or two that were cooperating, there was police chiefs that were cooperating, and a variety of other personalities. And they wanted to make sure, spy on those folks, to be sure that if they looked like they were going to come out and blow the whistle, that they could stop it off quickly. Well, in a short period of time, the Orwell operation of spying expanded to where they literally were spying on thousands of people. It included well, because it was working so good, it was working so well. The information, videotapes, etc., that they got on high-ranking people like governors, they tapped the bedrooms of governors. They tapped into the Kennedy family. They were watching them. They even, which is interesting, because these, we have to follow this, are kind of cowboys out of the CI, and some of them were former CI and existing Central Intelligence agents. These guys were tapping and spying on other Central Intelligence agents. They were spying on presidents, vice presidents, governors, senators, and congressmen.
And you were involved in bugging the White House?
Yes. We delivered from the inception of Clinton's presidency, starting at the inaugural, we delivered compromised equipment to Clinton's VIP tent at the Lincoln Memorial during the inaugural, and again at the executive office, starting with Hillary's Macintosh computer.
So, again, coming off of the basic drug operation, we had this fantastic secretive spying operation as well. And if we don't put a stop to this secret government, they're going to continue to deliver this stuff to our children and our grandchildren day by day.
It is an appalling charge. It is an appalling charge that goes to the heart of this country. It is a charge that cannot go unanswered. It says that the CIA, an agency of the United States government, founded to protect Americans, helped introduce drugs and poison into our children and helped kill their future. No one who heads a government agency, not myself or anyone else, can let such an allegation stand. I will get to the bottom of it, and I will let you know the results of what I found.
To this community, as far as we are concerned, most of us in this audience, is a mandate to close the investigation and to prepare us for him to say 6 months down the line that the CIA didn't do anything.
The line is, it absolutely can be proven.